Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Obviously, the theme of the conference, not really conference, of the symposium is timely and significant in view of what is going on in the West, in the US, in Europe, and in Gaza. I recall the story. He's an American historian who was a Fulbrighter some years ago in Taiwan. One day he came to my office, knocked on my door, and he was very excited because he found a map in one of the bookshops in Taipei City. And on the map, the Pacific was in the center, not the Atlantic, because all through his life as a historian, American historian, he has never realized that the Pacific can be in the center of the map. So he got very excited. He bought several copies. He wanted to give them to his students to remind them that there is another story in the map. So that's why I say the theme of the symposium is timely and significant. I want to begin by complimenting my good friend Sebastian Liao, a good friend for many decades, for what he has done for the Institute of the Advanced Studies in the Humanities and Social Sciences. I have the great honor of being a member of the advisory committee of the Institute for many years, and I've witnessed what a sea change of the Institute under his deanship in terms of academic performance, social and cultural engagements. So I think he deserves our big hand. Let us give him a Sebastian Liao is Dean of the Institute of Advanced Studies in the Humanities and Social Sciences and Distinguished Professor of English and Comparative Literature at National Taiwan University. He received his PhD from Stanford University and post-doctoral fellow at Harvard University. Obviously, of course, he did his BA and MA at this university. He was president of Comparative Literature Association of Republic of China and has served as president of the Taipei Chinese Center of International Affairs since 2020. Well, actually, he has a long list of administrative positions. He was once the Secretary General of the university and director of LTTC, the Language Training and Testing Center of this university. He was once enlisted by the Taipei city government to head its Bureau of Culture. He has written extensively on topics ranging from literary theories to Chinese Taoist philosophy. The books he has published, there are many books. I will just mention a few of them, which include Sorrows of Mending Heaven, Dreams of the Red Chamber as National Allegory, Who is Afraid of Meaninglessness, From the Avant-Garde to Postmodernism, and Illusions of Identity, Taiwan Cinema Since the New Cinema. He's currently working on two books projects, Deleuze and Taoism and AI, and humanities. This morning he is going to speak on the need to re-enchant Southern thought and posthumanism. Ladies and gentlemen, let me give you Professor Sebastian Liao of National Taiwan University.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Lee and my good friend Yo Cheng, for this very generous introduction. After Radha has opened up all these different lines of inquiries, it seems to me that we are going to really have a very lively day today. And I'm going to just address a few of the lines of inquiries in my presentation. All right, what I'm going to talk about is the need to re-enchant Southern thought and posthumanism. Yeah, by just looking at the title, I think some of you probably would have an inkling of what I'm going to talk about. It's more than intellectual thinking, or maybe it goes beyond the usual bounds of intellectual thinking. We are faced with a kind of 3-in-1 crisis. World War III, hopefully it would not happen, and the Anthropocene, which destroys the environment, and the unbridled development of technology, which may replace human beings. And if not, at least it probably would create a new ruling class, with all these plugins and money. And so these three are not necessarily 3-in-1, but I think they're mutually interconnected and very difficult to disentangle from each other. Okay, so how are we going to cope with these three crises? These are the popular. We have to go back to the origins of these problems, and the popular arguments include these, which some I have used actually myself in my essays, like the human inborn paranoid tendency to territorialize, and the human impulse to control what he she considers to be the heterogeneous elements or risk, and the deep-rooted, probably Western idea of the great chain of being, with God on top and minerals at the bottom. And then, of course, colonial modernity has intensified, or maybe the ruling class intention to control the other, and sometimes to eliminate the object, such as happened in the Holocaust. The Great Chain of Being, I believe, is probably one of the most serious problems. I mean, at the origin of all these crises. There are also other explanations, like economic reasons, from tribal wars to colonial expansion to world wars. All of them have to do with resources, especially economic resources. And these are very often disguised as ideological struggles, but in fact they're probably, at bottom, at the end of the day, they are economic, motivated by economic intentions, and but they are deep-rooted cultural factors, such as the Great Chain of Being, which are less attentive and sometimes consider politically too incorrect. So you can't talk about cultural origins of things, only political, economic ones. So I'm trying to go back to some of these so-called I believe to be the cultural problems that originated in the West. First of all, the ideal practice of holy war. And this is the beginning of the whole thing. God promises to Abraham that, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. No longer will you be called Abraham. Your name will be Abraham. For I have made you a father of many nations. I will make you very fruitful. I will make nations of you. And kings will come from you. And according to this scholar, this event changed the world. And of course, the idea of holy war is not only the kind of ideological or religious possession of the Jews, but also Christians and Muslims. All right, so God's promise to Abraham was the origin of many cultural future conflicts, because what God promises, I will give to you and to your offspring after you the land of your sojournings, on the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. So God is their God, not everybody's God. So in order to realize this possibility, Abraham's descendants needed to start the first holy war in human history, as well as, of course, the first ethnic cleansing we'll see in the following slides. I'm quoting all these from the Old Testament. Only in the cities of these peoples that the law of your God is giving you as an inheritance. You shall not leave alive anything that breathes. See that? So that's a beginning of holy war, as well as thorough ethnic cleansing. But you shall utterly destroy them. The Hittite and the Amorite, the Canaanite, and the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite, as the law your God has commanded you. Destroy them all, so that they may not teach you to do according to all their detestable things, which all these pagans do. So at that time came Joshua and cut off the Anakims from the mountains, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, and from all the mountains of Judah, and from all the mountains of Israel. Joshua destroyed them utterly with their cities. So nobody was left alive. This is, further kind of depiction of how this ethnic cleansing was going on. So I'm going to just skip this. So holy war, is it a kind of a repetition impulse in the psychoanalytic theories? Holy war is a concept deeply embedded in the nature of Judaism as well as Christianity and Islam, because they all worship the same God. Holy war is the common theme in the Hebrew Bible, divinely legitimated through the authority of biblical scripture and its interpretation. Holy war became a historical reality for the Jews of antiquity, among at least some of the Jewish groups of the late Second Temple period until the middle of the 2nd century CE. Holy war was an operative institution. That is, Jews engaged in what is defined here as holy war. So, doesn't it look kind of deja vu? That's what's happening again. Because in the previous quote, it mentioned that Gaza was actually spared from this whole thing. Here. Only in Gaza and Gath there remained people, but now maybe it won't remain that way. Okay, so I think the Holy One lies at the very origin of what is being happening again and again in the West. If we look at all these wars that occurred in Europe, most of them were religious wars. Most of them. So, the wars among these different, sects of religions, Christianity, including those esoteric sects. And then from the 3rd century to the 8th century, all of those wars were religious conflicts. And the Renaissance and beyond, again, and the 2 world wars, I think all the countries involved, they used similar slogans like this. Germany, Kaiser, Vaterland, Gott, and England too. The UK, they all use the same idea, same slogan. And colonialism was nothing but, a kind of a replication of what happened among these different Christian countries or sects. Yeah. Even Marxist and Socialist Revolution has a tinge of this religious impulse to dominate the world with one absolute truth. Yeah. This is another, of course, reason that caused the 3-1 crisis, because modern technology seems to have created a new form of great chain of being, which partially consolidated the whole great chain of being. And now, without God, but with the human beings on the very top, and then you go all the way down to minerals. Yeah. So it's not so different actually from the original religious great chain of being. And that's why modern technology actually also legitimates anthropocentrism, so that not only man can exploit Earth, but also man can exploit other men too. And that's what Heidegger has called Gestalt, treating everything, including human beings, as resources, which of course leads inevitably to Anthropocene. Yeah. And of course, new development of new phase of capitalism, which has been enhanced by the development of AI. And the latest phase of capitalism, which is neoliberalism, may, very soon usher us into the phase of technocene, which I hope would not happen. But I'm not very optimistic about avoiding the technocene. Yeah. And with the technocene, of course, you see the rise of the new right centered in Silicon Valley, where these people advocate dark enlightenment and having formed this, what people called pro-oligarchy, with all these famous big shots who consider themselves the new rulers of the world. So how are we going to cope with the 3-in-1 problem, having known that these were the foundational problems? We need to, of course, first of all, dismantle the great chain of being. With human beings on top, you can never, on top of the hierarchy, you can never really cope with these crises, or the 3-1 crisis. And the way to do it, as my topic suggests, is to resort to the suppressed heritages in the world, what Walter Mignolo has called the exteriority of modernity. I will begin with what Camus calls the Southern thought, and move on to the global East, global South, constantly expanding the scope to posthumanism, and to maybe a new form of animism or panpsychism and / Taoism. And what we need to do, echoing rather, is to resist homogenization, universalization, absolutization, especially the latest round of neoliberal globalization. The idea of Southern thought was invented or coined by Camus, who first mentioned this when he was delivering this lecture called "The New Mediterranean Culture" on the occasion of the inauguration of the Maison de la Culture in Algiers. I'm not saying, for me, Camus is just the beginning. I'm not saying that his discourse is perfect. He's still, criticized for being European-centered or Western-centered, or even Southern Europe centered. But anyway, he's a good beginning for us. In the last session of rebel titled Thought at the Meridian, Camus calls for a recovery of the repressed values of the Mediterranean heritage, the balance, which is the balance and equilibrium between extremes, the awareness of final limits and boundaries, the primacy of values internal to human beings that no longer originating from a philosophical system exterior to them, the respect for nature, and the affirmation of the present through the fraternity and solidarity of the human community against the promises of a distant and teleological future. And he continues, the difference between two is the difference between a circle and a straight line, between Hellenic thinking and Judaic thinking. The Greeks imagined the history of the world as cyclical. Aristotle, to give a definite example, did not believe that the time in which he was living was subsequent to the Trojan War. On the other hand, Christianity was obliged, in order to penetrate the Mediterranean world too. As a result, Christianity was obliged to analyze itself, and its doctrine then became more flexible. But its originality lay in introducing the ancient world two ideas that have never been before been associated: the idea of history and the idea of punishment. In its concept of mediation, Christianity is Greek. In its idea of history, Christianity is Judaic and will be found again in the German ideology. So what he's saying is that the Germans, forgive me for, I'm just quoting him, he thinks that the Germans changed Christianity back to the Judaic original kind of essence. But when the Inquisition and the destruction of the Albigensian heresy, the Church again parts company with the world, meaning the Greek attitude toward the world, parts company with the world and with beauty, and gives back to history its preeminence over nature. But Jasper is again right in saying it is the Christian attitude that gradually empties the world of its substance. And people, all these scholars who work in New Animism and Panpsychism, they subscribe to the same kind of idea that it's Christianity which empties the world of its spirit. So then you can actually treat the world as just resources, because it doesn't have any spirit in it anymore. But then the entry of this into this history of the Nordic peoples, who have no tradition of friendship with the world, precipitated this trend from the moment that the divinity of Christ is denied, or that thanks to the efforts of German ideology, he only symbolizes the man-God, the concept of mediation, disappears and the Judaic world reappears. This is basically his idea. And a contemporary Italian philosopher kind of revived him by expanding the idea of the South from the Mediterranean to almost a global South. So his emphasis is, calls upon us to not think of the South in light of modernity, because in Italy that was the way to do things. In the North we have modernity, and then Sicily, no, there's no modernity, and therefore it's backward. So he's calling upon us to reverse the way of thinking, but rather to think of modernity in the light of the South, because South could serve as a critique of modernity rather than being considered backward. And then he would argue that the Southern thought actually is a kind of endeavor that to decolonize the mind, to provincialize European thought, and to move beyond Northern ideologies. But he kind of clarifies this further by saying that the Mediterranean is both a geographical entity and a metaphor. So it's not limited. The idea, the southern way of thinking is not just limited to the South, but it could serve as a metaphor for all the kind of cultural heritages that have been marginalized by modernity. which of course includes the rest of the world. Okay, now from there we can move on to posthumanism, which is of course now kind of well rehearsed in some quarters of the intellectual circle, but not completely, not widely known in other corners of the intellectual realm. Yeah. Posthumanism basically is an attempt to de-anthropocize, to dethrone anthropocentrism. But the problem is that, how posthumanist can we get? I think many scholars who call themselves posthumanists actually stops at animals. If you go further down, then we can't be so posthumanist. Rocks, not at all. Yeah. But what I'm going to do is precisely to indicate that we actually have an obligation to rocks too. Yeah. The posthumanism also, begins with a renegotiation with the non-human, but I think my idea is that we need to radicalize posthumanism so that we can restore dignity to all things, and establish with Latour a kind of flat ontology, and this is the complete opposite of the great chain of being, because there's no more hierarchy. But now the problem is, how can we do it? How can we proceed to do that? And the idea, of course, is compassion. But how? How are we going to do it? How can we, first of all, evoke and arouse and cultivate compassion? How do we use compassion on all the things in the cosmos? And of course, to begin with, we need to overcome hylomorphism, where we have this transcendent whatever, which gives you form, or which possesses spirit, and then can give you form. And revert to, which is Western too, revert to this idea of hylozoism, which means all things are life. All things have vibrancy and agency. And a branch of philosophy which is very close to this, which is kind of an embodiment of this, is panpsychism, which believes that all things have some kind of mentality or consciousness. Of course, depending on how you define consciousness. And people like Deleuze and Guattari obviously are going in that direction too. So for them, this is what they argue, what is philosophy. For them, the reason we need philosophy is that we need to give birth to new modes of existence, closer to animals and rocks. And hylozoism, of course, is immanent. Life comes from within the things themselves. And this is, of course, the Zhuangzi, the well-quoted passage in Zhuangzi, which presents you with precisely a flat ontology. Where's Tao? Tao is in everything. Tao is in the ants. It's alive, right? It seems to have. It obviously has life. But then Tao is also in weeds, which has life too. But then Tao is also in the bricks. Well, it doesn't have life, seems to us. And then, of course, also in peasantship. This is the most famous quote that and the most radical idea of flat ontology, as well as posthumanism. But I think Western posthumanism so far has, most of it so far stopped short of accepting that this is possible. Okay, if you go back to the history of panpsychism, then you realize that actually from the very beginning, and for a long time too, human beings actually subscribe to the idea to this belief system called animism, which of course was disenchanted after the rise of modernity. But precisely, by destroying pagan animism, Christianity made it possible to exploit nature in a mood of indifference to the feelings of natural objects. The spirits in natural objects, which formerly had protected nature from men, now evaporated. This is what I'm quoting from Lynn Jr. White, where he clearly identified the problem with what's happening with our ecology, which is the subtraction of spirit from material world, from nature. Okay? And he further argues that, if the world is what is always and already alive, then of course we have ethical obligations to rocks. Why not? And so the modern kind of equivalent to animism is this, panpsychism, which is the view that all things have a mind or mind-like quality. And like I already said, which has played a very unique part in the history of philosophy too, not only in human living. And the most eloquent defense of panpsychism is called dual aspect monism, where the panpsychist would argue that that an entirely neutral basis that does not even contain some primitive or proto-form of mentality would not help us at all in explaining the emergence of the mind. Because it's considered a hard problem that, we don't really know how to explain why there's a rise of consciousness from matter. But of course, the panpsychist would argue that it's not. Consciousness does not arise from matter, but actually is in matter. So that's why matter is called dual. It has dual aspects: one physical, the other mental. This kind of panpsychistic monism claims that there is only one kind of thing, or one kind of entity, but it features physical and mental properties. And Chalmers, and as well as, and maybe more importantly, Whitehead, they both have argued in this direction in a very eloquent way. For Chalmers, basically his argument is that if there's experience associated with anything, such as a thermostat, then there's probably experience everywhere, in everything. Whenever there is a causal interaction, there is information. And whenever there is information, there is experience. So consciousness is maybe not the right word, but experience. So human consciousness is maybe just an exception. So I'm going to skip Whitehead. They all argue in a similar direction. And this is a modern day kind of a revival of the idea of a kind of a Gaia concept. And this actually has been written into the constitution of two countries, Bolivia and Paraguay, I think. And for them, this idea of Pachamama just means that everything, including human beings, are interconnected, and we need to live together with each other. Okay, and you can actually even see that in the Taiwanese, the cultures of the Taiwanese indigenous people, who are, for instance, a friend of mine who is actually a witch, not witch, but ritual, a shaman, and she is not only performing all these rituals. She's, by the way, also a professor at Donghua University. So sometimes he has just to run away from class to perform these rituals. And he not only perform these rituals, but also live with all the spirits that she's constantly encountering. Yeah. All right. I guess my time is up. Actually, I was going to talk about the Chinese Southern modality too, very soon. Okay, but time is up, and we'll find time to elaborate on that. This is I think there's 30 more slides on the Chinese Southern modality, Southern way of thinking, how it actually matters, not only in terms of ameliorating the kind of one-sided tendencies in Chinese culture, but also can join hands with the kind of Southern thought, or this, globalize the Southern thought that I've been just talking about. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Liao, for the rich and insightful lecture. Wow, he has 30 more slides to show us. So before he continue his job, any questions from the floor? Yes, please.
Thank you, Dr. Liao. I feel like you raised that question, and I just wanted to bring it to the floor, which is, I'm working on degrowth in Taiwan, or exploring. How do we raise, I feel like what you're saying is, how do we raise human consciousness? Have you heard of Ken Wilber? So he talked about how none of this will work. And he talked about the 4 dimensions and all that, right? And the big question is, how do we raise consciousness? Like, do we all take mushrooms? Or, how do we, that's the big question.
Hello, thank you very much for the lecture. My name is Yaron, and I hope that it's not too much of what the American call chutzpah, but I would like to really question the basis of what you told us. So the quote that you brought from the Bible, at least according to some scholars, there are something that came out in the 7th century BC or something like that. And they came very much after, in that region, there were a lot of ethnic cleansing and a lot of war, for example, by the Asheriet, that there was their habit to eliminate other people. So there is a discontinuity between necessarily the one God position and the practices that were at that time in this region. So if you read the Bible into the practices that were at that region at that time, then maybe this kind of ideological one God or the chain of being or anything like that is not necessarily part of the reason that this ideology developed in one way, in the same way. And coming back to this, maybe also what Camille said about the Mediterranean tolerance, and I'm talking as somebody that comes from the tolerance, from the Mediterranean, maybe what Radha told us before is that in India it works well when there is no conflict, but once there is conflict, it doesn't work so well.
All right, first of all, I wasn't talking about how we raise the consciousness, but how consciousness itself emerged from matter. We're made of matter, right? But we don't know when, at what point, consciousness arises from matter. You don't know where consciousness, right? And so that has really puzzled, philosophies from, over the ages. Nobody can truly explain how. And, all these neuroscience research can't do anything to actually locate consciousness. They know how, there's a kind of correlation between, the physical phenomenon with thinking, but they don't know where thinking is on the consciousness.
Thank you, Dr. Lau. What I meant was, how do we have the consciousness to be conscious of that? You see what I'm saying? I feel like that's the big question.
Right, that's precisely the point. Right. That's precisely the point why, people like, Bertrand Russell, Whitehead, Chalmers, David Bowen, Carl Jung, they all argue that probably matter is dual aspect. It has both. Because otherwise you're not able to explain why that we have consciousness. It's probably already there in the matter, rather than, if you look at, of course, people resort to, for instance, quantum mechanics. At the very quantum level, the particles already seems to have some kind of consciousness. They know, for instance, in the case of a quantum collapse, they collapse because precisely because you try to measure them, and they then become particles. But before you measure them, they were wave. They were waves, and so they knew that. They seem to know what you're doing. But of course, there's a lot of New Age arguments about using so-called quantum physics, and I suspect Ken Wilber probably belongs to that branch too. I'm not quite sure. I read a little bit by him. So I try to avoid the more kind of New Age kind of argument and stick to very academic kind of discussions. But I think this is the dual aspect monism has been accepted by partially by the academy. Of course, not all. Yeah. And so that's the first question. And then the second question is even more interesting. This gentleman is saying that if you go back to the history before maybe the Bible, I mean not before the Bible, but before the rise of Christianity or Judaism, they probably were already doing that, eliminating the enemies completely. If they engage each other in war. But I think if we look at the history of the development of monotheism, it's very interesting. I think according to a sociologist of religion, of Christianity in particular, they argue that actually in the area of Palestine and Lebanon, these tribes, they didn't try to eliminate each other. They conquer each other, and they just wanted them to adopt their religion.
That's not correct.
I think you have, of course, you kill a lot of people, yes. Yeah, but
archaeological history that shows that other region of the world it was the practice of human beings to eliminate other people all over the world.
They don't eliminate everybody. I don't think so. I don't think they eliminate everybody. Okay, my understanding of the development of monotheism is that these Jewish tribes, they conquer each other. Once they conquer each other, they wanted them to adopt their god. But the Jews were actually quite diplomatic, so you can actually use the name of your own god, original god, to address our God. So that's why in the Bible there are many names of God. Yeah. But then it was still the tribal God. The idea of monotheism developed in the Babylonian captivity, because for these tribes, if they won the war, that just proves their God is powerful. Like that's the most powerful. But once they were defeated by the Babylonians, they began to doubt whether or not actually their God was the most powerful God. So they had to subscribe to the new God, Babylonian God. But they again, the Jews probably were very ingenious in this case. They just thought up the idea that actually probably the God of the Babylonian God was just a henchman for their own God, because they were not serving their God properly. And so their God is using this Babylonian God to punish them. That's the birth of monotheism. And this enhances. I think that's why the scholar called this a world-changing event, because that changed everything. That you have full reason to eliminate everybody, in order to possess your promised land. So that's why it's called. What?
This is after the Assyrians already did it to the Israelis 200 years before. So it's history shows, even in the Bible, there is the description of the destruction of the kingdom of Israel that came 200 years ago, and it was an ethnic cleansing by the Assyrians 200 years before that.
Before what?
Before the Babylonian diaspora.
I think that's just redacted. The Bible is just redacted. It was a tribal history, right?
Yeah.
Old Testament was a tribal history. They redacted the tribal history in order to make their narrative coherent.
Hello, this is Xinya Huang from National Sun Yat-sen University. I really like your lecture, particularly in the title, Re-enchantment. You haven't spent much time, or maybe not touched on the idea of re-enchantment, but I take that as a kind of urgent and political kind of ethical gesture. And if you sort of place that in posthumanism, that even take on a more radical age. So I would like to follow up on the first question about raising consciousness. So consciousness emerged, and you also talk about our obligations toward the rock. Okay, so my question is how to think with a rock.
Actually, I spent most of my time talking about the need to re-enchant. Precisely because the world has been disenchanted, since modernity, right? Since the rise of modernity. And that kind of legitimates our exploitation of not only the natural world, but also, everything that we consider lower to us, including human beings. So we can actually, not we, but people have exploited, for instance, the Africans, American Indians, etc. Yeah. So, but also, of course, we can freely destroy the environment, treating it as just resources. And so it's urgent that we rediscover spirit or life or whatever in nature, in everything. And that's why I'm arguing that we have this ethical obligation to the rocks, because rocks is constantly contracting or expanding, right? Due to the change of temperature, so it has experiences, and without this reverence, or so-called reverence for nature, or natural reverence, all the kind of this ecological discourse would be, self-interest. It's only we do this because we need to survive, right? But if we turn things around by arguing that actually they deserve our reverence, then we will have a different kind of attitude toward nature. It's not self-centered, but human-centered, because we need to survive, and therefore we have to protect the environment. But it's the opposite. They deserve reverence, and therefore we need to respect them. It doesn't mean that we can't eat meat, or we can't eat plants. Plants have life too. Why are we eating plants? It's not that kind of attitude that I'm advocating. I'm advocating the sense of gratitude, compassion toward everything. Then we would stop treating, the world as just resources. Once it's useless, then we just ditch it as garbage, right? So, that's the reason why we need to re-enchant it. And to re-enchant is to rediscover the life which is already in everything.
If I could borrow a very good friend of mine, a Dakota Sioux scholar, Philip Deloria's word to complement what you have already done for the past 6 years, you are as solid as a rock.
There's a short story. There's a short story by a mathematician, which is called Panpsychism Revealed, and it's about this this guy who was in love with his colleague, but of course she's not interested in him. So one day he's developed this powder, which can, if you take the powder, then you would be able to read, the woman would be able to read the guy's name, mind. And so he gave the woman the powder, and of course the woman knows his trick, so she just put it on a rock. And then this guy feels a very dense, solid kind of mind or heart. All right, anyway, thank you.
Because you didn't have the chance to explain anything of your China background and the look south in China. You might want to consider the model then in Europe with Christianity, that Catholicism did incorporate a lot of paganism and animism in it, but the further you go north into the Protestantism, becomes more detached from nature, and then further again, Puritanism, which is trying to completely divorce itself from nature. So there's a kind of progression from that Mediterranean, Italy, Spanish, southern Germany, of the Catholicism, and the further north you get, the further detached. Now, I don't know if that parallels your Chinese model, but it might be an interesting comparison.
That's what precisely Camus argued. Albert Camus argued. In the case of China, there's a similarity, but not exact kind of similarity. Because in the north, mainly you can just kind of divide characterize the north and the south as Confucian and Taoist. It's very roughly. But in general, the Chinese culture is more immanent than transcendent. But Confucianism tends to be more transcendent than immanent, because they believe in this heaven, idea of heaven. Except before that, it was actually Shangdi, it was God. Yeah. But then the Chinese kind of abstractize it, make it very abstract. It's not a kind of a human-like figure there. It's just some kind of abstract thing that would give you mandate, and that's it. Yeah. But anyway, after the fall of middle of Zhou, the idea of nobody actually subscribed to the idea of heaven anymore. So both Confucius and the legendary Lao Tzu tried to revive the idea in order to give order to the society, but they adopted very different approaches. For Confucian, it's right in order to keep you in line with heaven's will. But in the case of Lao Tzu, it's like Tao is immanent in everything, even peasantship. So there's no transcendent idea there. Yeah. So very simply, over the history, actually, the center of China moved to, after Song, northern Song, moved to the south. And from then on, there's a lot of conflict between northerners and southerners. A lot of them. And sometimes even the emperor has to, in the end, the emperor, Ming Emperor, for instance, he has to install this system of northern quotas and southern quotas. So, these students, they should take they have different quotas. Otherwise, the northerners could not compete with the southerners, because in the first exam, no northerners was admitted into the civil service, and people in the north were in riots. And so, in the end, the emperor had to kill all the examiners to prove that, because he's from the south. Because by then, all the founders of dynasties were from the south, and so they had to appease the northerners. So he had to even go so far in order to prove that I am the king of all Chinese rather than of the southerners. And then you have all these Republican revolution was from the south, and then Deng Xiaoping had to reform China from the south. So, but people don't want to admit that. They don't want to see that the south is changing and actually resurrecting China. Yeah. And so I just like to go back to the intellectual tradition rather than the political, because if you look at Taoism, then you see that it could resonate with all these more animistic cultures, all the marginalized cultures in the world. And that's what we need to do, because by resurrecting all these pre-modern cultures, we are therefore able to, re-enchant the world to a certain extent.
Okay. Well, when it comes to the history of China, things become very, very complicated. Sorry, I am unable to wrap up what Sebastian has been talking about and his responses to many of the questions because more of my frail and failing mind as an old scholar. Anyway, thank you very much for your attention, and thank you, Sebastian, for the great. Thank you. I think the lunch is ready for us.
Not just yet.
Thank you, Professor Liao and Professor Lee. Let's give them another warm round of applause.